Hello and welcome. Please enjoy this short readiness video on Azure Database for PostgreSQL. All right, Umur, how are you doing today?
Very good, Sanjay. Thanks. How are you?
Great to have you with us again.
It's a pleasure.
Awesome. So can you please start with what do you do at Microsoft?
Of course. So I head up our Postgres product team at Azure. And before that, I was the CEO at Citus Data, which as of earlier this year is acquired by Microsoft. And now we're part of the Azure team.
Awesome. Welcome. So let's get started. So first of all, what are you going to talk about overall?
Well, what I'll cover, Sanjay, is just a baseline of why Postgres in the first place, and then diving into our Postgres offerings on Azure as a fully managed service, and then how we are changing what's possible with Postgres with Hyperscale Citus, being able to scale that horizontally in a very unique way, and then putting that all together for what makes Azure unique? When we say it's the best destination for Postgres, why is that the case? And then I'll wrap up with some use cases and resources to look at.
All right, my first question always, you have so many choices for databases. Why Postgres?
Yes, of course. Why not is my answer. But I'll give you a more nuanced one because here on this slide we have relative popularities of databases, and then the orange bar is Postgres and the blue one is Oracle. And I'll make two immediate observations. One is that Postgres is trending up very strongly over the past 5-6 years, but also it's more than a 20-year-old project that's very mature. The other is, on just absolute terms, it's very comparable to kind of a database like Oracle, which is of course extremely popular. So Postgres has this huge footprint, trending very strongly upwards and loved by developers. When there's a recent Stack Overflow survey that ranked Postgres as the most loved database.
I see.
Yeah, and the question 10 years ago was, why would you use Postgres, right? Or maybe longer, other than some people who were really into open source initially. Now the question is almost, why not use it? And I'll frame that in really three big buckets. Yeah. And I could talk the entire session on this, but I'll just keep it brief. First, it's open source. Not just open source, though. It's very popular, which means it has tons of developers, tons of ecosystem around it. All the tooling, all the integrations. The database is a lot more than just the database itself. And Postgres is huge in that regard, and it's very extensible, very integrated. The other is its reputation for reliability, right? So there's a lot of things in your stack that you might be a little adventurous with, but your database is probably not one of them. Yeah. And then Postgres has a tremendous reputation for not dropping data, being very reliable. And last is a huge, rich feature set, whether that's, ANSI, SQL compatibility, whether it's all the indexing or, tons of things. But I'll touch on the data types in particular, which comes with a very rich, there's data type for almost anything, like in Postgres. PostGIS is a popular one, for example, for geospatial data, and JSON, which is, semi-structured data, which you can store within a Postgres database next to your structured data in a binary way, index it, access it really fast, and get a lot of kind of modern relational, if you will, structured, semi-structured all together. It's a very powerful package. So that's why. So
JSON extracts tweets?
It could be tweets. It could be signal data that you get from IoT. It could be things that any device generates, and it could be very structured traditional data. So
like in a retail store, they have IoT sensors sending information.
You got it.
Okay, you can store
it could be patients. It could be like a manufacturing, industrial, like B2B businesses.
Awesome.
Pretty much everything fits into that.
Then the next logical question: why PostgreSQL in Azure?
Yes, in fact. So what we do on Azure is the cloud makes Postgres only better, right? So we get those core benefits of a reliable database that has very rich data type support, that's very performant and functional, and then we make it easy to manage, right? We'll monitor the database, we'll take its backups routinely. When something goes wrong, we'll fail you over, and one of the things that, wouldn't be surprising, perhaps, but you drop data accidentally. Sometimes you think you're doing stuff on the dev instance, but you're doing it on prod. Believe it or not, that happens quite frequently.
I've done that before. I was a DBA before.
So there you go. So it happens all the time. And what you want to do is it's a kind of oh shoot moment, and you want to go back in time, which is a point in time recovery. Right? These are all features that Postgres provides, and then we make it very easy to access. And beyond those, platform as a service PaaS type of capabilities, I'll highlight perhaps a couple of things that's very unique on Azure, things that leverage AI around that data. One example is, for example, what we call advanced threat detection, right? So this is looking at the access patterns to your database, and then if there is something unusual, then it'll raise a flag, it'll give an alert, so you look kind of more closely into it. Similar thing goes with performance. It'll look at your access patterns and your query performance times going back, and then make recommendations on what indexes to add, what ones to drop, etc. So it just leverages all of that with the entire goal of you focusing on your application. And then we worry about the database, patching it, all the security updates, everything, keeping the lights on.
That's awesome. So, having watched Ignite keynote,
yes.
I was super excited about the Hyperscale, Of course, we have created a demo together as well, Hyperscale
exactly.
demo together on PostgreSQL.
Which was very enjoyable.
So can you please share more about that?
Of course. What we're doing with Hyperscale Citus is actually changing what's possible with a database like Postgres. And when you think about it, actually, relational databases in general, and Postgres is an example of that, is criticized for sometimes being kind of harder to scale. And what that means is, it provides all this functionality. You put it in an instance, and then as your data grows, you put it into a bigger instance, and then a bigger one,
of course.
And then what? So that question kind of lingers at the back of your mind, or can, depending on your application, because as the data gets larger, performance becomes an issue, taking backups, doing the restore, like maintaining the database, everything becomes progressively harder and harder. And this is true for not just Postgres, but pretty much kind of all relational databases. And what we do with Hyperscale Citus is we change that equation. Like we say, instead of scaling up, or rather in addition to scaling up, you can also scale out,
yes.
Horizontally. So it's simple as taking a slider, dragging it from 2 machines to 20 or to 100 if you
yes.
wanted to, and then have all of that behave as a single Postgres to the application. And that's what really, and that's actually a very hard problem to solve. Prior to our Microsoft days, we spent more than 8 years at Citus Data building that technology and then bringing that to market. And now, kind of as part of Microsoft, keep investing in it, because what you're really doing is preserving all the relational semantics that Postgres provides to the application. So you don't want the application to have to know what data is placed where, and when failures happen, how will it roll back, how will it commit, is it consistent, is it inconsistent? All of those things belong to the database, and we enable that, so you don't have to get a PhD in distributed systems to be able to scale your relational database.
I see.
Yep.
And I know we have some live questions in the chat window as well for you. So one is, why not scale just storage?
Great question, in fact, and that's pretty commonly done, right? Like you can add more storage to a database like Postgres. Could have tens of terabytes, up to 64 terabytes or more, if you wanted to. But what that doesn't do is it doesn't scale the compute or the memory that goes with it, right? So you're creating a shared storage underneath, and then you're putting replicas of the database. You're not really solving this fundamental problem of a single instance getting larger. You're just giving it more storage. What that means is, for example, when you have a query that needs to touch upon multiple data sources.
I see.
You can do that in parallel, and Hyperscale Citus can do really fast, and you can actually add nodes in real time without any absolutely taking any downtime. You can add new nodes, extensiate them. That's the core difference.
And I know we'll see some live demos today.
Yes, exactly.
Well. Okay,
exactly. Now, putting all of this together, going back to the top of our talk, why does it kind of making Azure unique for running Postgres? First off are these kind of 3 core pillars that makes really Postgres strong. And I'll get to the open source a bit later on. Mm-hmm. But we add the Hyperscale Citus piece, right? This ability to scale horizontally and to do so with zero downtime. Basically the promise of the cloud, if you will, for Postgres and for that relational database. And then I talked about the intelligent cloud management features early on, which are only available on Azure. Mm-hmm. And the integrations that go with it, which are all the tooling that you like on Azure, whether it's Azure Data Studio for kind of like running your queries, interfacing with the database, or running Power BI to visualize things, or Azure Active Directory, Azure Data Factory, the data migration service, all of those things, Postgres integrates very neatly to that entire ecosystem. And we do all of this going back to this kind of open source tenant, preserving the open source. So we run the community version of Postgres, and actually the Hyperscale Citus product is also an open source extension on Postgres that's available that you can take, that you can run anywhere. What that means is you're not locked into a particular ecosystem, that you can actually take it and run it wherever you like. That's one aspect of open source. The other is actually giving back, and that's something that's really close to our hearts. Both at Citus Data prior to Microsoft and also at Microsoft, which is giving back to the community that's contributing code to the core project, contributing code. Citus itself is open source. Actually, at Microsoft, we have the most number of Postgres committers compared to all other cloud providers combined. So we are actually very serious about our commitment, to Postgres and making it better. So that's.
So as you know, I love Power BI. So actually, you can put Power BI in front of PostgreSQL and have near real-time data coming in.
Yes, exactly. You'll have standard connectors. You don't even have to have a special, connector. It's kind of your standard ODBC, JDBC drivers. You're good to go.
Awesome. All right.
Yeah. There are a couple of deployment options,
yes.
Which I've alluded to. You can go to the Azure portal. There's a single server and the Hyperscale Citus server group. Mm-hmm. You can instantiate those kind of in many regions across the world. There is another kind of short plug-in here for something that I'm super excited about, which is called Azure Arc, which we announced again last month at Ignite.
Of course.
It's not in production yet, so it's an early access program that you can kind of apply to. But what it does is it gives you all of these abilities that we talked about, not just on Azure, but anywhere, right? In your own data center.
Okay.
And it really kind of under the hood uses Kubernetes to do the orchestration and to do all the kind of database as a service-like, capabilities. I think there's another session tomorrow that we'll dive deeper into it, but it's something that I'm, really excited about.
Absolutely. I watched that Ignite demo live. It was fun. Azure Arc with PostgreSQL.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot more that's going to happen. All right. So given this kind of set of tools and capabilities on Azure, I'll talk about use cases just a little bit. For the single server, standard kind of Postgres, if you will, we see kind of three large groups of usage, if you will. One is if you're building new apps, right? That's a very common new modern cloud-native apps. In fact, more than I think 70% of all apps are getting built on open source relational databases, right? And Postgres is an excellent choice for that, as is MySQL in other areas. You can just instantiate on Azure, Kubernetes service. You can run it on app service. You can run it as a standalone using Python or Django or Rails, Active Record. All of those frameworks that Postgres supports is very rich.
I see.
So you can get going very quickly. The other is a more basic lift and shift motion, right? You're running Postgres on-prem. Now you run it kind of on Azure. You take advantage of the manageability features. And then a very common pattern we see is migrating or offloading Oracle, right? So there's a lot of Oracle databases which Postgres is functionally similar to. And then you can migrate the whole app, which depending on the app could be relatively high or relatively low effort. That's one path. Or you could actually offload the application, keep the Oracle app as is, but then move data to the cloud and then run analytics applications on it, or read replicas or other things, which basically reduces the burden on the kind of the existing database. And Postgres is an excellent choice if you think about it. Many companies going digital transformations, modernizing their infrastructure, looking at lower cost, looking at open source. Postgres is smack in the middle of that.
So they can migrate and then innovate.
Exactly. Do both and do that on Postgres and on Azure. The use cases for Hyperscale Citus touch upon, again, kind of three buckets. And one of the most powerful ones is because now I have this ability to add as much compute and memory, these hybrid transaction analytics applications, right? So when you have both analytics that your queries require and short request transactions, sometimes called HTAP, hybrid transactional analytic processing. Citus is excellent for it. Multi-tenant applications, B2B apps that are relational in nature, that can scale easily from one tenant to hundreds or thousands. That's very powerful. And then preserving relational semantics, very large data sets. Again, whether you have 100 gigs or a petabyte. And I'll just, the last slide, talk about some of our kind of customers in action,
yes, of course.
Whether it's Microsoft itself, Windows team running more than a petabyte large Postgres Hyperscale Citus, like a cluster.
Petabyte.
Petabyte, exactly. Which again, when I said changing what's possible with Postgres, we really mean it. You wouldn't be able to do those things before, but now all the goodness of Postgres, structured data and semi-structured data at that scale. And this system is getting more than 6 million queries per day and responding in the subsecond to vast majority of them, right? And that is all the telemetry data from hundreds of millions of Windows devices. It's a very powerful use case. Finastra is one of the largest fintech companies in the world, and they have a multi-tenant database, that powers all of their core APIs. And being able to modernize that and scale that out without having to re-architect the application from scratch. They're relying on Citus, Hyperscale Citus to do that. And NLift, I think there's a session that talks about, but in that case, it's as low as a few hundred gigs, or sometimes it could be smaller. So you don't have to be at petabyte scale to take advantage of this.
And of course,
it can be as, tens of gigs will kind of get you there. So yeah, there's a lot of resources out there. I won't go through all of them, but if I leave with kind of three parting thoughts, Sanjay,
yes.
When you think of, if you're thinking of Postgres, think of Azure for three reasons. One is hyperscale Citus, right? Like being able to scale, that's very unique to Azure. Two is the open source aspect of it, that we're not locking you in, and then we're actually contributing back to open source as we do that, all these capabilities. And third is all the Azure capabilities, whether it's the intelligent, like the threat detection, the query performance, or it's all the Azure integrations that are out of the box. Those would be three very good reasons, and more in the works.
That's awesome.
Arc and others.
Thank you so much, Umur, for this great explanation of why PostgreSQL in Azure.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thanks for watching this short Azure Readiness video.